She was left broken by her in-laws. Then the lone rancher said, "Come with me." She imagined waking up to mornings where sunlight would spill across her small room, the sound of birds singing outside her window, blending with the soft chatter of family members. She had dreamed of marrying someone kind, someone who would understand her hopes, and someone with whom she could share life's small joys. But as she sat quietly in the dimly lit kitchen of her husband's house, she realized that life rarely followed the patterns of dreams. Her marriage had started with hope. In the first few months, Amina's husband, Cameron, had been attentive and polite. He would ask her about her day, bring her small gifts, and listen when she spoke. Amina had felt cherished. She remembered the evenings when they would sit under the stars in the small courtyard, talking about their future. Cameron had spoken of a house filled with children's laughter and a garden where they could grow flowers and vegetables together. She had imagined herself living in that house, smiling, laughing, and finally feeling secure in her life. But slowly, the warmth faded. The attentiveness she had treasured became rare. Cameron started to spend long hours away, claiming work obligations. When he was home, his words were sharp, and he rarely looked at her the way he used to. Amina noticed the changes but tried to convince herself it was temporary. Perhaps he was stressed. Perhaps he had troubles he did not wish to share. She told herself that she should be patient, that love sometimes required endurance, and that with time, he would return to the man she had first known. Yet deep inside, a small voice whispered that something had changed irrevocably. Even more difficult than Cameron's distance was the behavior of his family. From the beginning, Amina's in-laws had been cold, their smiles forced, their words often cutting. They criticized her cooking, even though she had spent hours preparing meals that she thought were perfect. They commented on her clothing, her hair, and the way she spoke, often leaving her feeling as if nothing she did was ever good enough. At first, Amina had tried to overlook their comments, trying to believe that they only wanted the best for their son. But their coldness did not soften. Their criticism became constant, and every word felt like a tiny weight pressing down on her chest. Amina's days were long and lonely. She would wake before sunrise, complete her chores, and then sit quietly, hoping for a kind word from Cameron or a small gesture of recognition from his family. Often, she would find herself alone in the courtyard, watching the sky change colors as the sun rose higher. Sometimes, the breeze would carry the sound of children laughing in a neighboring house, and she would close her eyes, imagining what it might feel like to belong somewhere, to be truly valued, to be seen. Those small moments of longing often left her with tears she would wipe away quickly, unwilling to let anyone see her vulnerability. She tried to speak to Cameron about her feelings, but every attempt seemed to widen the distance between them. When she voiced her hurt, he would dismiss it, saying she was imagining things, that she was overreacting, or that she was too sensitive. Amina felt trapped between her desire for connection and the harsh reality of neglect. The man she had married seemed to have disappeared, replaced by someone she did not recognize. She began to wonder if the love she had believed in had ever been real, or if it had been only a brief illusion that faded as quickly as it came. The in-laws were not just critical, they were controlling. Amina had no freedom to make small decisions about her life. When she wanted to visit her parents, they found reasons to prevent it. When she wanted to wear a dress she liked, they frowned or questioned her intentions. Even the friends she had made outside the house were discouraged from visiting. Gradually, Amina found herself isolated, her world shrinking to the four walls of the house she had once imagined as a home. Each day felt longer than the last, and the light that had once shone in her heart began to dim. There were moments, however, when Amina's spirit tried to fight back. Late at night, when the household was silent, she would sit on the small veranda, looking at the stars, imagining a life where she was free. She imagined herself walking through open fields, laughing and living without fear of judgment. In these quiet moments, she found a fragile kind of hope. She wrote in a small notebook, filling pages with her thoughts, her dreams, and the small plans she dared to make for a future that might someday belong only to her. These notes were her secret, a reminder that even in darkness, a small flame could survive. One afternoon, things took a turn that left her feeling completely alone. Cameron had left for the city on a work trip, promising to return in a week. Amina had thought a brief absence might give her time to reflect, to find some strength, to breathe in her own small way. But his absence only brought the full weight of his family's cruelty. They criticized her openly, claiming she was lazy or careless, mocking her in ways that made her feel small. She tried to stay quiet, trying to keep her composure, but inside, her heart ached with despair. She realized that for the first time, she was completely on her own, without the protection of someone who should have cared for her. Amina began to notice changes in herself. She felt a heaviness in her chest that no amount of tears could lift. Sleep became difficult, and when she did manage to rest, her dreams were filled with confusion and sadness. She questioned her self-worth, wondering why she deserved such treatment, and why the people who should have loved her instead made her feel invisible. Her reflection in the mirror seemed unfamiliar, a woman who smiled less, laughed less, and carried the invisible scars of unspoken pain. Despite the suffering, Amina's mind never stopped seeking a solution. She reminded herself that her life was not over, that even in the harshest situations, one could find a way to survive. She began observing small patterns in her in-laws' routines, thinking quietly about how she could regain control over her own life. Each evening, she would sit in the dim glow of the lantern, her notebook open, sketching out tiny plans, saving small amounts of money, imagining a day when she could leave the house and breathe freely again. Though fear was present, it was accompanied by a spark of determination that refused to die. Her world had become a mixture of sadness and secret hope. She had been pushed to the edge of despair, yet a small voice within her whispered that escape was possible. The courtyard where she spent so much of her time became a symbol of her resilience, a place where she could look at the sky, count the stars, and remember that life was bigger than the walls around her. In the quiet moments, she rehearsed what she might say to claim her freedom, imagining herself stepping into the unknown with courage and dignity. Amina's story in this first chapter of her life is one of quiet endurance. She had been hurt, isolated, and misunderstood, yet she had not surrendered entirely to despair. She learned to observe, to plan, and to hope, even when the people around her failed to show kindness. Her spirit, though tested, remained alive in small acts, a written word, a whispered dream, a secret plan for a better life. She understood, perhaps instinctively, that the journey ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in a long while, she dared to imagine a life that could belong entirely to her, a life where she would no longer be broken, ignored, or silenced. And so, as the sun set behind the distant hills, casting a golden light over the small courtyard, Amina sat quietly, her notebook in her lap, a small smile forming despite everything. She did not yet know what the future held, but she knew one thing with certainty: she would survive. She would find a way to reclaim her life, her voice, and her happiness. And somewhere beyond the horizon, perhaps waiting just around the corner, a new chapter of her story was ready to begin. Days turned into weeks, and Amina felt the weight of loneliness pressing down on her more heavily than ever. Every morning she woke up to the same routine, preparing breakfast, cleaning the small, dusty rooms, and tending to the chores that seemed endless. Yet the walls of the house felt tighter, closing in on her as if she were shrinking under their constant scrutiny. The small smiles or polite words that she had once longed for from her in-laws had vanished completely. Now, even small gestures of kindness were rare, replaced by sharp tones, critical glances, and heavy sighs. Amina spent hours in the courtyard, her favorite escape, staring at the sky as it changed from the pale gold of morning to the deep blues of evening. She would watch the clouds drift lazily, imagining herself floating away with them, leaving behind the burden of her pain. In these moments of quiet, she whispered to herself, "I must stay strong, I must survive." She clutched her notebook tightly, writing down tiny fragments of hope, a kind word, a fleeting smile from a stranger, a small act of courage she had managed that day. The notebook had become her closest friend, a silent witness to her thoughts, fears, and dreams. The isolation was hardest when she saw others enjoying what she could not. She noticed mothers walking hand in hand with their children, laughing and chatting freely. She heard neighbors greeting each other with warmth and affection, something so ordinary yet so distant from her life. Sometimes, the faint laughter of children in the village square reached her ears, and it pierced her heart with a mix of longing and sadness. She wanted a life filled with love and freedom, yet all she could see were walls, closed doors, and critical eyes watching her every move. Her attempts to connect with her husband were now almost hopeless. Cameron had grown cold and indifferent, and his letters, when they arrived, were brief and impersonal. He asked about her well-being, but without any warmth or emotion, as if the words were simply a duty to fulfill rather than a genuine concern. When she had tried to share her feelings with him in person, he had brushed them aside, claiming that she misunderstood his intentions or that she was overthinking. Each time, the hope she had clung to a few months ago weakened, leaving behind a small, cautious ember of desire for affection that she dared not nurture too openly. Despite this, Amina's inner strength began to grow in small, quiet ways. She learned to observe the world carefully, noticing the small rhythms of life that went on around her. She studied the habits of her in-laws, memorizing which times were best to move freely and which moments required her to stay quiet and unnoticed. She discovered that by staying calm and composed, she could avoid unnecessary confrontation. Her mind became sharp, alert to the subtleties of her surroundings, and though she felt sadness deeply, she also began to cultivate patience and resilience, skills that would serve her in ways she could not yet imagine. Amina also began to notice herself changing. Her once timid and gentle nature had grown steadier, more cautious, but also quietly determined. She began practicing small acts of independence within the constraints of her home. When she cooked a meal exactly to her liking without seeking approval, she felt a flicker of pride. When she managed to spend a few quiet moments in the garden, tending to the small plants that stubbornly grew despite neglect, she felt a strange sense of companionship with them. These little victories became her secret treasures, reminding her that even in hardship, there was space for growth. Yet, the loneliness remained a constant companion. She had no one to share her thoughts with openly, no one to reassure her that she was more than the harsh words and critical eyes that surrounded her. She felt the sting of each day keenly, like a subtle but persistent ache in her heart. In the evenings, when the household had quieted down, she would sit on the veranda, letting the cool night breeze touch her face, and imagine what it might be like to live without fear, to wake up to a day she could shape herself. She imagined waking up and choosing who she wanted to speak with, where she wanted to go, and what she wanted to do. In these dreams, she tasted freedom, a sensation she had almost forgotten. Her imagination often took her far beyond the small village. She pictured herself walking along open fields, feeling the wind sweep across her face, and hearing only the sounds of nature and her own footsteps. She imagined a small home of her own, where she could decide the rules, choose her companions, and live without constant criticism. Sometimes she imagined meeting someone kind, someone who would respect her and see her for who she truly was, someone whose presence would feel like safety rather than pressure. These thoughts filled her with both hope and fear, for she knew such a life seemed far away, almost impossible, yet the mere idea kept her spirit alive. As the days passed, she began to notice small things that brought comfort. A stray cat had begun to visit the courtyard, curling up beside her as if understanding her sadness. She would feed it quietly, and its purring became a source of solace. Birds perched nearby, singing their songs in the early morning hours, reminding her that life went on despite the heaviness she carried. These small companions gave her tiny moments of peace, little reminders that she was not completely alone, and that even in a difficult world, kindness and warmth could still exist. One afternoon, a neighbor, an elderly woman who had always been kind to Amina, brought her some freshly baked bread. She spoke gently, asking how Amina was faring and offering a few words of encouragement. Though brief, the interaction reminded Amina of the humanity outside her house, a world where people still cared. She realized that the isolation she felt was not permanent, that connections could be made even in small ways, and that perhaps, someday, she could step into a life where compassion and support were part of her everyday existence. This realization gave her a glimmer of courage. Amina also began to understand that planning for the future required careful thought. She could not leave without preparation, for running blindly might bring danger or disappointment. She began saving small amounts of money from the limited resources she could access, hiding coins in her notebook, tucking away small notes that outlined her hopes and ideas for freedom. She created a mental map of where she might go, imagining places beyond the village, imagining fields, rivers, and towns where she could breathe freely. Each plan she made was a silent act of rebellion against the control her in-laws had over her, a statement to herself that she would not surrender entirely to despair. Even with her careful planning, fear remained a constant shadow. She worried about being judged, about the unknown, and about what might happen if she left the only home she had known, however harsh it had been. Nights were the hardest, when silence allowed her thoughts to swirl freely. She would clutch her notebook, writing long passages about what she wanted, imagining conversations, picturing herself walking into a new life with courage and dignity. These writings became her lifeline, a way to transform fear into action, despair into hope, and loneliness into preparation for a future she might yet claim. The people around her remained mostly unaware of the depth of her suffering. To them, she was polite, quiet, and seemingly obedient. They did not know the battles she fought inside, the dreams she nurtured in secret, and the strength she gathered from the smallest sources of hope. Amina had learned to hide her emotions, to smile when required, and to speak minimally, preserving her energy for the moments that mattered most. The quiet strength she developed in these weeks would soon become the foundation for a life-changing opportunity she could never have anticipated. Amina's journey during these lonely days was one of observation, reflection, and resilience. She learned to recognize the small moments of beauty in life, even in the midst of sadness. She nurtured tiny sparks of hope, understanding that survival required patience and courage. And though her world remained confined, her imagination and quiet determination carried her beyond the walls, beyond the harsh words, and into a space where freedom and kindness were still possible. Every day, she grew more aware of her own strength, more determined to create a life that could finally belong to her, and more ready to seize an opportunity when it finally appeared. And in those moments, as she watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Amina realized something profound. Her heart, though heavy and bruised, was not broken beyond repair. It could heal and it could hope, and one day it would guide her to a life where she would be truly seen, truly valued, and truly free. The days continued in the same quiet, lonely rhythm for Amina, but one afternoon, something unexpected happened. Something that would slowly begin to change the course of her life. She had gone to the village well to fetch water, balancing two small metal buckets in her hands, her steps careful along the uneven path. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm, golden glow across the fields. The air smelled of earth and wildflowers, and for a brief moment, Amina felt almost at peace. That peace, however, was about to be interrupted by a new presence, one she had never expected. As she lowered the buckets into the well and began to draw water, she heard the soft crunch of footsteps behind her. She turned slightly, and her eyes met those of a man standing a few feet away. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a quiet, steady demeanor. His clothes were simple but well kept, a sign of someone who worked with his hands but also respected his appearance. His eyes, a clear shade of green, held a calmness and warmth that immediately caught her attention. There was something about him that made Amina pause, a sense that he could see more than what was on the surface. The man spoke gently, his voice low and measured. "Good afternoon. It's a hot day. May I help you with those buckets?" Amina was startled by the offer. She shook her head quickly, her hands gripping the metal handles tightly. "No, thank you," she replied softly, unsure why the sight of this stranger brought both comfort and unease. There was a pause, and then the man smiled, not in a way that demanded anything from her but simply as a gesture of kindness. "All right," he said, stepping back slightly, "but if you ever need help, I am nearby." Amina couldn't explain why, but something about him lingered in her mind long after he left. She finished her task quickly, feeling a strange mixture of curiosity and hope, emotions she had not felt in a long time. Who was he? Why did he seem different from everyone else she had met? She tried to shake off the thoughts, telling herself it was foolish to think about a stranger, but her heart had already noticed him. Over the next few weeks, Amina began to encounter him more often. The man, whose name she learned was Rhett, lived on a small ranch on the outskirts of the village. He was a quiet man, used to solitude and hard work, but he was also observant and patient. Each time Amina saw him, he greeted her with a nod or a small smile. Sometimes he offered a word of encouragement or asked about her well-being in a manner so sincere that she felt a warmth she had almost forgotten. Slowly, she began to look forward to these brief encounters, her heart lifting slightly each time their paths crossed. Rhett never pried into her life or asked personal questions. He seemed to understand, instinctively, that trust could not be forced. Amina found this approach comforting. She could speak to him lightly about trivial matters, the weather, the crops in the nearby fields, or the stray animals she often saw around the village, without feeling pressure. These small conversations became a lifeline, tiny windows of freedom where she could exist as herself, without judgment or criticism. Each interaction strengthened her fragile confidence, a confidence she had long thought lost. One afternoon, as she returned from gathering herbs near the edge of the village, she noticed Rhett sitting on the fence of his ranch, watching the horizon. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the golden fields. For a moment, Amina simply watched him, noticing the ease in his posture, the quiet strength he radiated. Gathering courage, she spoke softly, "Good evening." Rhett turned, his green eyes meeting hers. "Good evening," he replied. "You seem troubled today." "Everything all right?" Amina hesitated, then shook her head slightly. The words were difficult to form, but something in Rhett's presence made her feel safe enough to speak. "It's nothing," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Rhett nodded slowly, not pressing her further. He simply said, "Sometimes sharing a burden makes it lighter. You don't have to face everything alone." That evening, Amina returned home, her mind a whirl of conflicting emotions. She felt something unfamiliar stirring inside her, a mix of hope, curiosity, and cautious excitement. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to imagine the possibility that someone could truly understand her, that someone could offer support without expectation or judgment. Yet the fear of her in-laws and her husband's coldness lingered, reminding her that reality was still harsh and unyielding. Days turned into weeks, and Amina's interactions with Rhett became more frequent, though always brief. They met at the well in the fields, or along quiet paths where the village crowd could not observe them. With each conversation, Rhett's calm demeanor and quiet wisdom drew Amina out of her shell. He would talk about the land, the weather, the animals he cared for, and occasionally about life in general. He never forced opinions or advice upon her, but in his stories, Amina began to see lessons that applied to her own life. She noticed that he valued patience, resilience, and self-respect, qualities she had begun to nurture quietly within herself. One day, while she was walking near the river that ran behind the ranch, Amina stumbled on a small stone and fell into the shallow water. Rhett appeared almost immediately, helping her up with a steady hand. His touch was gentle but firm, and she felt a sense of reassurance she had not known in years. "Are you all right?" he asked, his eyes scanning her carefully. "Yes," she whispered, feeling the warmth of gratitude spreading in her chest. He smiled, a smile that was patient, understanding, and free of judgment. "Good," he said simply. "Be careful. The path is tricky here." It was moments like these that began to plant the seed of courage within Amina. She realized that the world outside her oppressive household could hold kindness, understanding, and trust. Slowly, she began to imagine a life where she could exist without fear, where she could make decisions for herself and be respected for them. Rhett had become a symbol of that possibility, though she barely dared to admit it even to herself. Yet, as her bond with Rhett grew, so did her awareness of the risks. She could not afford to be seen talking to him too often by her in-laws. Their scrutiny was sharp, and even the smallest hint of independence or outside connection could be used against her. Amina became careful, learning to hide her moments of joy and conversation. She would return home with her face calm, masking the flicker of hope that had been ignited within her. Each interaction with Rhett became a treasure, a secret piece of light in her otherwise gray days. One evening, as the sky turned shades of orange and pink, Amina and Rhett sat quietly near a small grove of trees by the ranch. They watched the sun dip below the horizon in silence. It was a moment of peace, rare and precious. Rhett finally spoke, his voice soft. "You don't have to stay where you're not valued," he said gently. "Life is too short to live under someone else's control, to have your spirit crushed by others. There are choices you can make, paths you can take, even if it feels impossible." Amina looked down, feeling the weight of his words. She had thought about leaving before, in small, secret ways, but fear had always held her back. The thought of stepping into the unknown without support terrified her. Yet Rhett's calm presence, his unwavering respect for her feelings, made her believe that perhaps it could be possible. Perhaps there was a way to leave the life that had made her feel invisible, to step into a space where she could breathe, grow, and be herself. That night she returned home with her mind racing. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word, every smile, every moment of kindness that Rhett had shown her. Slowly, the idea of escape began to take shape, not as a reckless flight, but as a carefully considered plan. She realized that she did not have to suffer in silence anymore, that there was a possibility for freedom, support, and a life where she could be valued. Over the following days, Amina's courage grew, fueled by her quiet interactions with Rhett. She began to imagine a future where she could walk with her head held high, make her own choices, and live without fear of constant judgment. Each small act of bravery, whether speaking up slightly to her in-laws or secretly saving money, became a stepping stone toward the life she longed for. Rhett had not simply offered words or gestures. He had shown her that hope was still possible, that she was not alone, and that someone could believe in her when she struggled to believe in herself. Amina knew the journey ahead would not be easy. She had to plan carefully, weigh risks, and summon courage she had not fully realized she possessed. But for the first time in months, she felt a spark, a small, steady flame of hope that could grow into the light of a new life. She realized that she was not powerless, that kindness and understanding existed beyond the walls of her oppressive home, and that she could take steps toward a future defined not by fear, but by her own choices. And so, as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Amina sat quietly in her room, her notebook open, her heart beating with cautious excitement. She wrote down her thoughts, her plans, and her dreams. Each word was a declaration, a reminder that she had the power to change her life, that she could move toward freedom and self-respect, and that someone like Rhett had shown her that hope could still exist. The journey was only beginning, but for the first time in a long time, Amina felt ready to take the first step. Days passed with the quiet tension of anticipation hanging over Amina. Every morning she went through her routines, preparing meals, cleaning, and attending to the endless demands of her in-laws. But now, there was a new awareness in her every movement. She was no longer just surviving, she was planning her freedom. Each glance at the sky, each quiet step through the courtyard, reminded her that life could be different, that she could choose her path. Red had shown her that hope existed, and now it was up to her to seize it. Amina's heart raced as she considered the practical steps she needed to take. She had been quietly saving coins for months, tucking them away in her notebook, hidden beneath pages of dreams and observations. Every small coin felt like a piece of power, reclaimed from a life that had sought to control her. She mapped her escape in her mind carefully, studying the daily patterns of her in-laws, noting the times when they were most distracted and the windows she could safely pass through. Fear was still present, a shadow that followed her, but it was tempered by a growing determination she had never felt before. One evening, after her in-laws had gone to sleep, Amina sat by the dim candlelight, packing a small bundle. She chose only the essentials, a few sets of clothes, her notebook, a small amount of food, and the coins she had saved. Each item she placed carefully in the bundle, thinking of it as a step toward a new life. Her hands trembled, but her resolve remained steady. She whispered to herself, "I can do this, I must do this. My life is mine to live." In that moment, Amina realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. The night of her departure arrived, and the world outside was quiet. The moon hung low, casting silver light over the village. Amina moved silently, her heart pounding in her chest. Every creak of the floorboards felt like a loud alarm, every shadow a potential danger. She clutched her bundle close, her eyes scanning the courtyard for any sign of her in-laws. She had rehearsed this moment many times in her mind, imagining every obstacle, every reaction, and every step she would take. Now it was real. Now she had to move forward. As she reached the edge of the village, Red appeared as if he had known exactly when she would arrive. His presence was calm and steady, a reassurance in the darkness. "You're here," he said softly, offering his hand. Amina hesitated for only a moment before taking it, feeling the strength and reliability in his grasp. I can't go back," she whispered, her voice trembling. Rhett nodded, understanding more in that single moment than words could convey. "Then we move forward," he said simply. And together, they walked toward the outskirts of the village, leaving behind the house that had held so much pain and confinement. The journey to the ranch was quiet, the air filled only with the soft sounds of their footsteps and the distant calls of night birds. Amina felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration. The world outside the village was larger, freer, and unfamiliar. Every rustle of leaves, every shadow in the moonlight, reminded her that she was leaving behind the familiar but painful life she had known. Yet each step also brought a growing sense of liberation. She was moving toward a life of her own choosing, a life where she could finally breathe without fear. When they reached the ranch, Rhett opened the gate with ease, his hands gentle but strong. The land stretched out before them, wide fields bathed in moonlight, the distant hills standing silently under the stars. The air smelled of fresh grass and earth, a sharp contrast to the stifling confines of her former home. Amina stepped inside, feeling the vastness of space around her. For the first time in years, she felt free. It was not yet a life of comfort or certainty, but it was a life of possibility, and that was enough. Rhett guided her through the ranch, showing her the small house where she would stay, the barn where animals were kept, and the fields where he worked each day. Amina listened carefully, absorbing every detail, knowing that this knowledge would help her feel at home and independent. "You will have space here," Rhett said, "and you will also have the choice to grow in your own way. Nothing is forced. You can rest, learn, and decide what you want to do next." His words were not just reassurance, they were an invitation to rebuild herself. The first night on the ranch was quiet and reflective. Amina lay awake in her small room, listening to the soft sounds of animals in the barn and the whisper of wind through the trees. She felt a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and wonder. The fear that had haunted her for months was still present, but it had diminished, replaced by a new awareness. She was safe here, at least for now, and she could start to heal. She reached for her notebook and wrote about the day, about the courage it had taken to leave, and about the hope she felt in stepping into this new life. Writing had always been her refuge, but now it became a bridge to the future she could shape. In the days that followed, Amina began to learn the rhythms of ranch life. She helped feed the animals, learned to care for the small garden, and practiced new skills with a sense of curiosity and purpose. Rhett guided her gently, never pushing too hard, but offering support whenever she needed it. Each day she felt a little stronger, a little more confident. The independence she experienced was empowering, and she realized that the small victories, fixing a fence, preparing a meal, or guiding an animal back to the barn, were steps in reclaiming her self-worth and rebuilding her life. Amina also began to notice changes within herself that went deeper than the physical tasks she performed. Her mind felt sharper, her heart lighter, and her spirit more resilient. She discovered that she could make decisions for herself without fear of judgment, that her voice mattered, and that her feelings were valid. Rhett never interfered with her choices, instead offering quiet guidance that encouraged reflection and self-reliance. She began to understand that true freedom was not just the absence of oppression, but the presence of agency, trust, and support. There were moments when memories of her past life came flooding back, the harsh words, the isolation, the days of despair. But now they felt less like chains and more like reminders of the strength she had gained. She had survived cruelty, neglect, and fear, and now she had stepped into a life that offered respect, compassion, and opportunity. Each day, she grew more certain that leaving her in-laws' house had been the right decision. She was no longer defined by their criticism, but by her own courage and determination. One afternoon, as she worked in the garden, Rhett approached her with a small basket of fresh vegetables. "You're doing well," he said quietly. "I see how much effort you're putting in, and it matters." Amina felt warmth spread through her chest. Recognition, genuine and heartfelt, was a sensation she had not felt in years. She smiled, realizing that this encouragement was not fleeting. It was part of the foundation of a life where she could thrive. It reminded her that small gestures, consistent support, and trust could heal wounds that had once felt permanent. The evenings on the ranch became a time for reflection and conversation. Amina and Rhett would sit by the small fire, discussing the day, the animals, the land, and occasionally their thoughts about life. These conversations were never rushed or demanding. They were spaces where Amina could speak freely, share ideas, and simply be herself. Slowly, she felt the layers of her past pain peeling away, replaced by understanding, reassurance, and the comfort of human connection. It was a stark contrast to the harsh, critical environment she had left behind, and it reinforced her belief that she had made the right choice. Amina's sense of freedom and self-worth grew steadily, as did her sense of hope for the future. She realized that she no longer needed to wait for someone to rescue her. She had already taken the first, and most important, step herself. Her courage, planning, and careful observation had brought her to this new life. She understood now that the journey of healing was not instantaneous, but each day, each small act of independence, and each moment of trust built a stronger, more resilient version of herself. By the end of the first month, Amina had begun to feel a profound sense of peace she had not known in years. She had escaped the oppressive control of her in-laws, found a safe space to live, and started to rebuild her spirit. Though challenges remained, there were always chores, the land required constant attention, and the unknown future still loomed. She faced them with a confidence and determination that had been impossible before. She was no longer the quiet, fearful woman who had sat alone in the courtyard. She was becoming someone who could shape her own life, define her own happiness, and embrace the possibility of love and companionship on her terms. And as she stood on the porch of the small ranch house one evening, watching the sunset paint the fields in warm gold, Amina whispered to herself, "This is only the beginning. I am free, I am strong, and I will create a life that belongs to me." For the first time in a long while, she truly believed it. Life on the ranch slowly became Amina's new reality, a reality unlike anything she had ever imagined. The first days had been filled with nervousness and uncertainty, but as the weeks turned into months, she began to feel a steady rhythm in her life. The air was cleaner, the skies wider, and the space around her larger, not just physically, but in a way that touched her spirit. She no longer felt the suffocating weight of constant judgment and criticism. Instead, she felt a gentle freedom, a quiet promise that she could finally live life on her own terms. Each morning, Amina would rise with the sun, the warmth of its first light spilling into the small room she now called her own. She prepared a simple breakfast and stepped outside to breathe in the fresh morning air, listening to the soft sounds of the animals stirring in the barn. The cows lowed softly, the chickens clucked, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. These were simple sounds, yet to Amina, they felt like music, a rhythm of life she had long been denied. The small chores of feeding, watering, and caring for the animals gave her a sense of purpose and accomplishment. Each task, though sometimes tiring, reminded her that she was capable, that she could nurture life and care for it, and in doing so, care for herself. Rhett continued to be a quiet, guiding presence. He never demanded anything from Amina, never pressured her to act or speak in ways she was uncomfortable with. He offered advice only when asked and taught her new skills with patience and encouragement. Slowly, Amina learned to ride horses, mend fences, and tend to the fields. Each skill she mastered became a small victory, reinforcing her growing confidence and independence. More than the physical skills, she learned the rhythm of responsibility, the satisfaction that came from honest work, and the reward of seeing effort transform into tangible results. Amina also began to explore her own creativity. The small cabin had a quiet corner by the window, where sunlight poured in during the afternoons. Here, she would write in her notebook, not just about her past, but about her dreams, her goals, and her hopes for the future. She began to sketch the landscapes around her, the animals she cared for, and the little moments that brought her joy. Writing and drawing became forms of meditation, ways to process her emotions and celebrate the life she had reclaimed. Each word and sketch was a declaration. She was alive, she was free, and she was building something meaningful. Evenings became her favorite part of the day. After the sun had set and the land had quieted, Amina and Rhett would sit together near the fire or under the open sky. They would speak of simple things, the weather, the animals, or stories from the past, but sometimes Amina would share her reflections about life. Rhett listened with patience and understanding, never judging, always validating her feelings. These conversations were more than companionship. They were a safe space where she could speak freely, feel heard, and continue to heal. Over time, Amina realized that trust, patience, and respect were as vital to her growth as the work she did on the ranch. There were days when memories of her past life would resurface, testing her resolve. She sometimes thought of her in-laws' cruel words, the loneliness she had endured, and the uncertainty of the years she had lost to fear. But now, these memories no longer had power over her. She met them with reflection rather than despair, reminding herself that she had survived, that she had acted courageously, and that she had created a life far richer than the one she had left behind. Each time she faced these recollections, she grew stronger, more aware of her own resilience, and more determined to continue on her chosen path. Amina began to understand that healing was not linear. Some days were easier, filled with laughter and contentment, while others brought doubt or longing for familiar connections. Yet, she no longer feared these fluctuations. Instead, she learned to embrace them, understanding that life included a mix of emotions, and that her own strength was defined not by the absence of hardship, but by her ability to navigate it with courage and grace. The ranch, the animals, the open fields, and Rhett's unwavering support became anchors in her ongoing journey of healing and self-discovery. One day, as Amina worked in the garden, she noticed a small bird struggling to fly. Its wing seemed injured, and it fluttered helplessly among the plants. Without hesitation, she carefully picked up the bird and tended to it, using the knowledge she had gained from her daily work. She fed it, cleaned its wing, and gently placed it in a safe space to recover. Watching the bird gradually regain strength and finally fly away filled Amina with a profound sense of joy. She realized that caring for others, whether animals or people, brought her a sense of purpose and fulfillment that she had never known in the confines of her old life. It was a symbol, she thought, of her own recovery. Just as she had healed, so could others, with patience and kindness. As the months continued, Amina's confidence and independence blossomed. She found herself laughing more freely, making decisions without fear, and exploring the boundaries of her new life. She discovered that she could cook meals she loved, experiment in the garden, and even plan small projects for the ranch that added beauty and efficiency. Each accomplishment reinforced the truth she had discovered months ago. She was capable, she was valuable, and she had the right to live a life defined by her own choices. Amina also began to understand the importance of companionship and connection. While she cherished her independence, she recognized that trust and mutual respect could create bonds that enriched life. Rhett remained a consistent presence, not as a savior or a judge, but as a partner in this shared journey of growth and care. Their bond deepened through shared work, quiet conversations, and small gestures of trust. Amina felt a sense of safety and belonging she had never experienced before, and it allowed her to fully embrace the joy of companionship without fear of judgment or control. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Amina reflected on her journey. She thought of the long months of fear, loneliness, and oppression she had endured. She remembered the moments of despair when she had doubted her own worth, and the nights she had spent planning a life that seemed impossible. And yet, here she was, alive, independent, and finally free. She felt a quiet pride and gratitude for the courage she had shown, the careful planning she had undertaken, and the resilience that had carried her through. Amina realized that her life was now her own story, written by her own choices and nurtured by her own efforts. The ranch was not just a place to live, it was a canvas upon which she could paint the life she had imagined for herself. She had space to grow, to learn, and to explore the world on her terms. The lessons of her past, both painful and instructive, had shaped her into someone stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. She had learned that hardship could build resilience, that loneliness could teach reflection, and that hope, even when fragile, could guide one to freedom. As she walked through the fields one morning, the sunlight warming her face, Amina felt a sense of serenity she had never known. The animals she cared for moved around her contentedly, the breeze whispered softly through the grass, and the vast sky stretched endlessly above her. For the first time, she felt truly at peace. She had escaped the life that had tried to break her, and she had created a life that allowed her spirit to flourish. She understood that happiness was not something to wait for. It was something to cultivate, nurture, and claim with intention. By the end of the first year on the ranch, Amina had fully embraced her new life. She had healed, grown, and discovered strengths she had never imagined. She had found joy in simple moments, the laughter of animals, the warmth of sunlight, the quiet companionship of a trusted friend, and she had learned that her worth was not dependent on the approval of others. Her past, once a source of pain, had become a reminder of her courage and resilience. She no longer feared the unknown, because she had already faced her deepest fears and emerged stronger. And as she stood on the porch one evening, watching the stars emerge in the night sky, Amina whispered to herself, "I am free. I am strong. I am worthy of happiness." She smiled, feeling the fullness of life in her chest, knowing that she had not only survived but had created a life rich with possibility, love, and hope. Her journey had been difficult, but it had brought her to a place where she could finally be herself, live freely, and embrace the beauty of each day. The story of Amina, the young woman who had once been trapped and broken, had transformed into a story of courage, resilience, and renewal. She had left behind fear, cruelty, and confinement, stepping into a life of independence, growth, and joy. She had discovered that freedom was not just the absence of control, but the presence of choice, trust, and self-respect. And with each sunrise over the wide fields of the ranch, she knew that her heart, once fragile and wounded, had healed, ready to embrace the life she had always deserved.